Please join me in welcoming, bringing together communities confronted by diverse faces of hate, the Community Relations Service approach.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Julius Nam. I'm an assistant United States attorney in Los Angeles. And I had the privilege of working with CRS in the CRS front office, the Community Relations Service front office, until last week. So I'm very excited and privileged to serve as a moderator this afternoon to talk about the community relations approach to bringing communities together that are confronted by diverse faces of hate. I'll first talk a little bit about Community Relations Service as to what it is and what it stands for, what it seeks to accomplish. Established by the 1964 Civil Rights Act that was signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson with the support of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., CRS, Community Relations Service, was established as America's peacemaker to address community tensions, disputes, conflicts that arise on the issues of discrimination or tensions that arise on race, color, and national origin. Over the last 60 years, CRS's mandate and jurisdiction has expanded, notably in 2009 when the Hate Crime Prevention Act was signed by President Obama. CRS's mandate increased and jurisdiction increased significantly to include issues of disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, and religion as well, in addition to race, color, and national origin. And these are the different issues and conflicts about which CRS engages to provide, as Brett mentioned, mediation, conflict resolution, and de-escalation of tensions that arise in the face of hate. CRS accomplishes its mission as part of DOJ, but with this unique mission that stands apart from prosecution or enforcement or investigation. It is an entity that is really distinct from the typical work of DOJ, and the CRS accomplishes that mission through the work of facilitation of dialogues, mediation, which is more formal mediation agreement and that parties engage in, consultation, providing technical assistance to various entities that are facing hate and other challenges, and providing training. And in the course of that, CRS abides by 4 pillars that you see on the screen. These pillars are 4 values and principles of impartiality, voluntariness, that there's no coercion involved at all, confidentiality, and no-cost free service as an act of service. Our panelists this afternoon in this few minutes are consisting of current and former CRS members, in addition to a CRS partner. To my left, we have at the end Rosa Salamanca, who is a regional director in the Mountain Central region, who currently serves as one of the leaders of CRS. Next to her, we have Becky Monroe, who is former deputy director of California versus Hate Resource Line and Network and former acting director of CRS. Next to her is Carl Smallwood, who is the current executive director of Divided Community Project at the Moritz College of Law at the Ohio State University, who is a CRS partner. Charles Phillips, who is a regional director in the Atlantic North region based in Philadelphia, a current CRS leader. And to my immediate left is Paul Montero, who is the current secretary in the state of Maryland Department of Service and Civic Innovation and a former director of CRS. Also present in the audience is the current component head of Community Relations Service, Justin Locke, who we're glad to have really partnered with us in planning this program. So our program will discuss the different ways CRS engages in various jurisdictional issues. And I'll first go to Becky. Becky, if you could talk about how CRS partners with communities, governmental and non-governmental stakeholders in addressing hate and challenges coming from racial animus and religious bigotry.
Thank you, and it's truly an honor to be here. And part of why is that when we talk about the Community Relations Service, there is a deep recognition embedded in this mission that if we're truly going to address civil rights issues, we cannot only do so through litigation, but we actually need to trust in the wisdom of community leaders and make sure that they are at the center of this work. So I want to talk about two cases or two matters that the Community Relations Service worked on while I was acting director. And I think they help to sort of capture the ways in which CRS can be used by you, by other community leaders, at times when communities are at risk of being torn apart by discrimination and hate, and talk about two things. And this is something I think I really want to emphasize. The Community Relations Service can help respond in the immediate aftermath of an act of hate or of another incident, but it also can help communities to address the long-standing systemic issues which often are driving and underneath acts of hate. So I first want to talk about the murder of Trayvon Martin. So I think most people in this room will remember February 2012, the murder of a black teenager who was just trying to walk home. His murder, as you may all recall, surfaced long-standing tensions around racism and discrimination, not only in Sanford, Florida, where he was murdered, but also across the country. The other thing I want to highlight is that CRS was brought in early, and we were brought in before there was a determination as to whether or not what happened would be prosecuted as a hate crime. What really matters, and this is true for CRS across the country, if the community perceives that an act of hate or discrimination has occurred, that's what triggers our jurisdiction. You do not have to wait for a determination by a prosecutor or anyone else. Part of the beauty of CRS is that our mandate is driven by the community. So in this case, initial engagement was by Regional Director Tom Battles, who's from Florida, had grown up there. One of the things you're going to hear about is that CRS has regional offices across the country, develops those relationships that are very important, and help to open lines of communication. That means when there were 60 young people marching across the state of Florida seeking justice for Trayvon, he was able to help connect them with law enforcement across the state so they could be safe. We also helped to work with, and part of what Tom did was he put together an interracial and interfaith organization that still serves as a model today. And so we call them informally God Squads, which many of you may have heard. But again, CRS can help pull that together. Sometimes there is the desire in the community, and it just takes somebody coming from the outside, from a neutral party, to help bring that together. The other thing I want to emphasize here, and this is something that is also due to the wisdom of Andrew Thomas, who works for the Divided Community Project and recognizes Community Relations Service is not there to stop protest. It is not, we really believe unity is not uniformity. We are there to make sure that protests stay safe. And so part of what Sanford recognized was there was a real need for these protests to happen. So how do we keep them safe in the short term, and then quickly then turn to longer term sustainable mechanisms to address the issues that people were talking about in Sanford. It was not only the murder of Trayvon, it was the murder of other black men in that community. It was the destruction of a community called Goldsboro, which was there before Sanford. It was a thriving African-American community that was absorbed by Sanford, and its history felt like it was being erased. It was thinking about who got resources and when they got those resources. So CRS was able to help work with advocates in the short term to make sure things stayed safe. There were over 80 protests during that time. There were no arrests. There were efforts to block the doors to the police department, and we were able to help work with community leaders to de-escalate. But part of what they did too is they said, we have to do something beyond this. This is not only happening today, this is addressing long-term systemic issues. So we work with them, and again, with leaders like Andrew Thomas, who worked for the local government in Sanford, and is a real legend in terms of civil rights mediation. He helped them develop a 9-point plan that was implemented over years. So part of what I want to emphasize is that not only can CRS help to keep people safe in the short term, but really help to recognize that a part of our mandate is to help address longer term issues. And then I finally want to talk, the other case I want to talk about here is Oak Creek, which I think many people also remember and that was in August of 2012. Many remember the massacre at the Gurdwara, and I know others have talked about it here. I think part of what we want to recognize there was that there were Sikh leaders not only in Oak Creek but across the country who were coming together. Such was the power of this community. And so part of what we did was to help make sure that the national organizations that were there to support the Sikh community and the local organizations, and again, law enforcement at the national, state level, when people are in crisis is not the time when they should have to figure out which level of government to go to. Part of what CRS can help you do is navigate that, figure out how to bring the different parties together. So whether it was facilitating a meeting at a high school in the short term afterwards, to helping people figure out how to facilitate funerals that would be safe and allow people to grieve, working with law enforcement in the short term, and then in the longer term, law enforcement recognized there that they needed to think about how do we develop core principles, guiding principles, that will not only address how we responded to this crisis and to this devastation, but how we're going to work with the community going forward. So I think, one of the things I want to leave you with is that peace is not the absence of difference. When we call ourselves the peacemakers, we are not there because we want to get rid of difference. It's actually the embrace of difference. It's the recognition that we all need to work across different communities to combat hate and advance justice. And CRS offers really practical tools to do that. We are under no illusion that we have the answers of the federal government. Rather, we are under the recognition that community leaders know what to do. They just sometimes need a little support to do it, or they can help. It can be helpful sometimes to have someone coming in from the outside. So, I think part of what I also will leave you with is with CRS, we spent a lot of time making sure, again, that we were not trying to paper over or to create peace at the cost of having truth. And so I think part of what we recognize here is that we have to reckon with the racism and discrimination and the hatred that continues to devastate the country. And until we reckon with that directly, and CRS allows people to sort of have that opportunity, more parents are going to be grieving for their children and children for their parents, as we saw with Trayvon and with the Oak Creek massacre. So I am grateful for the opportunity to talk to you all. I hope that you will use CRS. It is an incredible resource. And it is really predicated on the recognition that the answers are not in government, but that government's role is to make sure that we are supporting the leadership in communities.
Thank you, Becky. Paul, CRS also works, and I know in your time as director of CRS, addressed issues arising or challenges arising in the aftermath of gender-based violence and LGBTQ bigotry and hateful acts against LGBTQ individuals. Could you talk about CRS's work in that jurisdictional area?
Absolutely, and thank you for letting me join the panel here. I've missed working with you all, so it's good to be back with the Peacemakers. And Director Locke, thank you very much for including me in this panel. The Club Q incident, the shooting of Club Q in Colorado Springs in 2022 was a matter that CRS worked while I was director. And in my mind, was still the Pulse nightclub shooting. I was acting director in 2016 when that happened, and CRS rallied quickly to send conciliation specialists to Orlando. But coming back to the job after 5 years and having this obscene incident of violence targeting what was seen as a safe space in a community that had not always had a seamless relationship with the LGBTQ plus community. It's mid-November, right before the holiday season, Thanksgiving around the corner. And you have an individual who ends up shooting and killing 5 people and injuring many more. Actually, I had pulled in Justin Locke as my chief of staff at the time because he had more than 15 years in the trenches, in the field, doing the work of conciliation. So I asked him to come on as my chief of staff, and we immediately rallied. We touched base with the regional office in Colorado, the office that Rosa occupies in Denver, and started working the phones really to make connections to see how we could add value. In the immediate aftermath of a matter like that, you don't want to overwhelm a community that's itself grieving and in shock and personally impacted by the violence. Identifying who the leaders were who were trying to support their community, and a lot of credit goes to Director Locke for working the phones to figure out the lay of the land, as it were, so we could integrate. And, they're getting overwhelmed by calls, they're getting overwhelmed by media requests, and so we were able to establish an initial foothold such that we could do just a couple of virtual meetings to start to ascertain what they needed. Not coming in and telling them this is what you need to do. This is what the playbook is. Justin was able to share, I think, some best practices in the immediate aftermath of similar cases, but the conversation quickly pivoted to resources. These were folks that were running LGBTQ plus organizations that were supporting young people, people of any age, and resources are a reality. And people had acute needs in that immediate aftermath. So again, continuing to use the CRS network that's across the country and certainly with the federal government, I was able to connect with my former colleagues who were the LGBT liaisons at the White House. I had been at the White House for 5 years before becoming acting director. So they had a wonderful Rolodex of these are the people to talk to in terms of funders looking to invest in LGBTQ organizations. At all points respecting our role at DOJ is not to direct outside funding or funders or foundations, but we could connect people. We could connect needs and resources, and so Director Locke was actually able to pull together through an organization that was sort of the bridge, the bridging organization, and they convened a virtual roundtable fireside chat the day after Thanksgiving. Again, these were folks that were not sleeping. They were not able to focus on any holidays because they were busy supporting people in real time. But that fireside chat, again, it's us creating a space, bringing people with resources to the table, and allowing them to hear directly from the community as to what do you need. To Becky's point, CRS does not speak for, CRS does not script or put people on the message. It's really coming in to ascertain what they need, and based on the services CRS provides that you had on the earlier slide, figure out what we offer that is relevant. And sometimes the answer is maybe one of our services is not relevant at this point. But CRS, I think over the decades it's been around, goes the long way with communities because there is an unfortunate cadence to, on the other side of a traumatic incident, what happens 6 months later when the media is gone? What happens a year later when you're burnt out? What happens 2 years later when you're thinking about the public memorial? And CRS has, I think, a lot of subject matter knowledge because these individuals have worked these matters with communities to at least showcase what a community might think about, working to see how we could interface with the city council. They actually flew the flag from Pulse nightclub, a commemorative flag of the original Pride flag that had been done in 2003, commemorating 25 years since the first flag in '78, flown in Colorado Springs, which was a major thing for Colorado Springs. And the last thing I would say is just CRS is at all points, we do not take sides. And just looking around the corner of how hate-fueled violence can have knock-on effects, Justin and I worked to reach out to even the evangelical community in Colorado Springs. Folks reeling from this traumatic incident, a spasm of violence. Again, 5 people died, 19 injured. Some folks may want to blame somebody. And we reached out to different evangelical ministries to just be sure, were they seeing any hints of increasing conflict, any incidents of vandalism, any things that would make them feel unsafe in their houses of worship. Because again, our services are provided to all people because no one wins when folks act out their biases or hates. So that's a snapshot of what we did in Colorado Springs.
Thank you. I'll turn to Rosa. Hate comes in intentional, vicious forms in many instances, as we've been talking about the last 3 days. But hate is also couched, at the very least, from the perspective of those who are encountering that hate in the form of systems, in the form of embedded hate and discrimination, even in systems of justice. And CRS also engages when communities are facing or are feeling such hate and discrimination. And that was your experience in working with tribal communities. Could you talk about your experience and how CRS engaged tribal communities in your region?
Sure, absolutely. What I can share with you initially is that spotting systemic faces of hate is hard to do. So you really have to pay attention because they're quite well hidden. CRS works with tribal communities in terms of addressing perceptions of hate, racial discrimination, and disparate treatment. We do this and we look at communities by way of a theory that we have, which is known as a two-taproot theory, much like a tree. The first branch of that being that there is the presence or existence of unresolved conflict due to hate and discrimination that has never been addressed. And second taproot is that there are no redress mechanisms that are addressing those concerns. And when those two elements or two taproots come together, then you have conflict. As I work through these cases with Dakota Access and Keystone XL Pipeline, I found myself thinking about three primary areas. One was the lack of cultural appreciation, the access barriers and obstacles that were present, and enforcement practices. So keep those in mind as we talk about this. The first are the obstacles. Again, pay attention because these are systemic. What we find and what tribal members report is that at a federal and state level, permitting and scoping opportunities or decision makers fail to recognize that under-resourced or vulnerable communities are not able to withstand environmental crisis, and they prioritize dollars or financial gain over those vulnerable communities. Second, tribal members report that hearings in those communities are not widely publicized, and so there are times in which those occur and tribal members are not able to participate. They also report that there are no hearings on reservations, and when that happens, then there's difficulty in having tribal members venture out beyond reservation boundaries because they don't have access to public transportation. The hearings are also held in inaccessible areas, as well as participants have been turned away from hearings or scoping sessions because of their attire. They may show up with a t-shirt with a message and be turned away, and so their voice, most of all, is not heard in those hearing sessions. During the Keystone XL Pipeline conflict, this occurred in a small area close to what we call Circle, Montana. It's right on the border of Montana and the Canadian border. And the Keystone XL Pipeline actually has two legs to it, the southern leg and the northern leg, which is the one that CRS was most directly involved with. This territory is known as Assiniboine Sioux Treaty Territory to that local community. The protesters learned of Keystone XL going in, not by way of hearing announcements, but by social media. And once they did, they began to organize, and they requested that CRS assist them in opening communication with law enforcement, with health department, and with TransCanada. We were able to do that, and as a result of those conversations with law enforcement, we came up with a plan for rules of engagement on the street, which basically means how are protesters going to conduct themselves, what is their intention around civil disobedience or marching, or what are routes. In addition, we were able to work with local entities around permitting requirements and making sure that the protesters were in compliance with that. We had law enforcement liaisons connecting with the demonstrators. We also outlined what march safety would be. Sometimes on those routes, as people are walking through neighborhoods or out in the general public, there are those who don't respect that march and may intend to do harm or accidentally do harm. So we try and mitigate that occurrence. We also assisted with ceremonies in terms of helping law enforcement to understand what was going to happen and what they would be using. Sometimes there's misunderstanding about what those ceremonies involve, and so that was quite helpful to the tribal community members and to the demonstration organizers. The protesters who came together around Keystone XL really wanted a voice. They wanted an opportunity to object. They saw Keystone XL as a threat to their water supply. They consider it sacred. They consider it their only water supply and had previously experienced contamination in 1960. They also objected to the fact that the pipeline might disturb their burial sites. So CRS, again, by way of that convening of stakeholders, was able to provide the opportunity for the demonstration organizers and law enforcement to come together to figure out how they were going to implement the demonstration. And they, as a result of those conversations, were able to come together. They ended up going on site. They were able to articulate who and what protesters would be participating. There were no acts of civil disobedience that was planned. There was demonstration activity, and all of this occurred without incident. That means that there were really no arrests or no violence that occurred. What I also want to say is that when the protesters learned of law enforcement's willingness to come together and to engage in conversation with them, problem-solving conversation, they turned away a number of other protesters. They sometimes do this by call-outs, and what the local leadership said was, you know, we don't need this at this time. Law enforcement is working with us, and indeed, law enforcement did. They were able to not only assist in the demonstration, but they also identified the sacred burial sites, and with the help of TransCanada, were able to go to those sites and ensure that as the pipeline went in, that those burial sites were not disturbed. There was a relationship that was formed. It was a genuine communication, an effort to really honor and respect the wishes of the Native community. So I want to turn now to another area, which is the Dakota Access Pipeline. They started out in the same place, okay? So CRS also reached out to stakeholders, engaged them in problem-solving discussions, which mean law enforcement was at the table, demonstration organizers were at the table, and tribal leadership was at the table. When they came together, they were able to also agree on rules of engagement during the demonstration, with the ultimate goal of finally disembarking the encampment. That was present during those discussions. Now, when CRS gets involved in these situations, what we try and do is hold those discussions in a way that allows for a full review of the issues and concerns and interests, real or perceived. Okay, let me say that again, real or perceived. What I want to share with you is that in the beginning, there was really a small group of people who were in there who formed the encampment. That was about 50 folks. It went from 50 to 100 to 8,000. It was a prime example of Native American culture, customs, and practices. It's not your typical trading post experience. And it gathered over 200 tribal representatives, both domestic and international, who focused on two things: protecting the water and enjoying clean water. There were in the background a number of political tensions and hostilities towards the protesters who were not recognized for what they were trying to do. CRS often convened with encampment leadership, with tribal leadership, as there were different points of conflict throughout the course of this encampment, which started in 2016 and ended in 2017. As the camp grew, tensions within law enforcement and the broader community also grew. CRS provided conflict resolution and mediation, if you can imagine, at different points in time as conflicts erupted. We provided shuttle diplomacy as needed when discussions broke down and when people were hard-pressed to come together. We facilitated opportunities for civil disobedience that allowed for people to demonstrate and articulate their concerns. But providing a CRS presence also helped the protesters to engage in their civil disobedience without being harmed by law enforcement. So I also want to say that we helped in mitigating intergroup tensions. There were some private security or a private security firm that was hired which used counterterrorism tactics and often referred to the protesters as insurgents and jihadists. And we conducted shuttle diplomacy, resolving truancy issues for the young folks who were in the encampment, and there were issues that were brought up to some of the like Department of Education or Health Department about what was going on with these kids. We addressed disparate use of force. Again, security was brought in, private security was brought in to help the TC Energy in implementing their pipeline. But during the course of their stay there, or their interaction, they used attack dogs and pepper spray on the protesters. Police and National Guard erected blockades. There were water cannons that were used in sub-freezing weather on the protesters. There were allegations of abuse in the jails. And there continue to be unresolved issues with some of the anti-protest bills that are present and that have been passed. So what I want to leave you with is there are many paths to finding solutions, and both stories, they met their goal. They just arrived there at a different way. CRS does not tell you what to do, but we will work with you to have the best outcome possible.
Thank you, Rosa. Charles, we've been talking about how CRS works in communities that are facing conflicts, or in CRS, how CRS works in situations in the aftermath of violent tragedies. CRS also works in school settings, in educational communities. If you could talk about how CRS addresses these various jurisdictional issues that happen on campuses, especially secondary schools.
Sure. Thanks, Julius. And I would say a lot of the stories that we've been talking about are kind of headline grabbing, where CRS was sort of had an organic response, but we also have a number of programs that we do as well. And one of those programs is called the SPIRIT program, which stands for Student Problem Identification and Resolving Issues Together. And this program is one that we normally approach the school, or a school that knows about CRS approaches us after, in the wake of, say, like a viral meme that a student puts out on social media that might be racist or hateful, in which case we would reach out to school district administrators or school administrators and offer up this SPIRIT program that we conduct with schools. It's a one-day program, and I'll go through the mechanics on that. But the goal of the program is to bring students together, to speak with one voice to administrators on things that they feel are concerns and things that they want to address, and solutions to those concerns. It creates a council that meets regularly with administration after this one-day event that we conduct, and hopefully that council, is something that continues going on for years after that. This is a program that we've done for at least a couple of decades now. We've done it at a few schools in Pittsburgh. We've done it in, well, all over the country. And again, oftentimes this might be a big fight that has a racial overtones to it, or it might be social media type events that cause concern throughout the entire student body, and is something that needs to be addressed by the school. So the steps to get to the program implemented in the school is as I said, we'll meet with school administrators. And then from meeting with the school administrators, it's a one-day program that has a lot of moving parts. So we put together a planning group that consists of school administrators as well as students and faculty to put together we'll determine everything from what we're having for lunch that day to the students that are going to be invited, which is usually between 40 and 60 students that are invited to the process. And in terms of where we're going to identify facilitators, because we usually have local facilitators facilitate breakout groups for this program. And then once we have all of those logistics in order, then we go ahead and have the Spirit Day. And that Spirit Day we'll start off with the 40 to 60 students that we want to have is very representative of the entire student body. We want to be really careful that we are not, we're inviting leaders from the student body that might be considered sort of positive leaders, but leaders also that might have peer groups that are not so much sort of positive, that lead sort of positive groups as well. We want it to be a very, very representative group of folks from the student body, so that when we finish this program, they're able to go back to their peer groups and share with them information about the process. So once the school day follows, or the Spirit follows the full school day. We start with the school administrator welcoming the students, letting them know sort of what they signed up for, and then CRS folks will give an overview of the process that would include this slide, for example, and let the students know what's going to happen that day. Then we go into breakout groups, and during those breakout groups, the students will sort of give what they see are sort of positive issues that are going on within the school, as well as challenges that the students feel like need to be addressed. And we want those to be sort of thematic to, what the students would want for there to be a more safe and supportive school environment for the entire student body. After that first breakout, we go into sort of the lunchtime part of the day, where there's going to be dot voting, report outs from all of the groups all the breakout groups from that morning session, and then we'll go into the afternoon session, which is a problem-solving breakout group, where each of the students, or all of the students, have the opportunity to share what they think would be solutions to the top problems that were identified during the process. And then finally, we end up with introducing the Spirit Council that will then meet regularly with school administrators after the Spirit program. And we guide, CRS actually guides that Spirit Council so that they can lead themselves like a typical school group that meets with administration. So that's, again, that's something that we do regularly with schools around the country to address issues as they occur that are jurisdictional to CRS.
Thank you, Charles. So CRS works in schools, various school settings, and in religious spaces, places of worship. CRS also works in communities, as we've talked about, that are facing tragedy in the aftermath. And also, CRS partners, not only serves communities in distress, but also partners with stakeholders, such as the Divided Community Project at the Ohio State University, where Carl serves as the executive director. Carl, if you could talk about our partnership and how other stakeholders might partner with CRS in working toward eradicating hate.
I'm happy to. Thank you, Julius. You know, in this room of heroes and sheroes, I'm glad CRS got a chance to tell some of its stories, because the people at CRS are, in fact, heroes. They drop into conflict zones and stand in the gap in the midst of hate, in the midst of grief, in the midst of fear in communities, and find ways to create go-betweens, find ways to mediate conflicts that are there. So I'm thrilled you had a chance to hear a little bit about the Community Relations Service. You didn't hear about them all the time because their work is confidential. They're mediators, and so they don't advertise all of their work. But some of the communities have authorized them to talk about some of the work that they've done, and that's why you've heard these stories. But rest assured that they are helping communities every day around the country in the conflict and the hate incidents that are happening in our country. I'm going to do two other things while I'm here. I'm going to talk about how CRS and the 60 years of experience and lessons in addressing hate in communities get translated into guidance that communities can use with the help, I hope, of educational institutions, academic institutions like the Divided Community at the Moritz College of Law on the Ohio State University campus. The slide you're seeing, I think, is some of the publications that we, the Divided Community Project, have done. We are a group of scholars, dispute resolution systems designers, and mediators, and we translate some of these lessons of dispute resolution into guidance such as the publications that you are seeing that can help communities address conflicts based on race. So initiatives designed to address race inequity, like Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, for example. The green one on the top is to address signs, symbols, monuments, public spaces, things that represent hate in communities, and there ought to be a process to address those. And there's some guidance that we've provided for that. The third is on political polarization. I don't need to tell anybody in this room that it's an issue that's causing division in our communities. The last one I'm going to talk about in a second. The two on the bottom are what I want to focus on for the rest of this conversation and leave you with tools that you can walk away with. After October 7, 2023, the Hamas attack on Israel, the impact on the campus community was different than what we saw in previous iterations where there was conflict on campus. According to some research, 56% of Jewish students did not feel personally safe on campus. 52% of Muslim students feared for their personal safety. And a percentage of students who were neither Muslim nor Jewish feared for their safety on campus. So this was an issue that was divisive, deeply personal, identity-based conflict and hate that needed to be addressed. And some of the tools had to be refined to be able to address the issues that campuses were facing. The Divided Community Project did so in a couple of iterations of guides for those communities to help campus leadership address that. And the document that you see there that is navigating conflicts, and if you use your phone, you can do the QR code. You know that better than I do, probably. That has a series of checklists and guidance that not only campus leaders can use, but students can use with each other to have conversations. And again, we're talking about deeply fearful student groups, people who need support. You know, this morning we talked about sort of, are you okay? I mean, that kind of a question was one that needed to be posed in that time and in the time since. And so the guidance that exists, that is now a joint publication between the Department of Justice Community Relations Service, the Department of Justice Community-Oriented Policing Service, and the Divided Community Project, is the guide that you see that is Navigating Conflicts, a guide for campus leaders and public safety personnel. And it talks about assessing how the campus is doing, deep listening to hear how your campus, how your students are doing. And this could apply to, you know, most of our work is on universities and professional schools and in those settings. But I just met a few minutes ago with a group of high school educators, and I hope these tools can be of use to you as well. In addition to assessing communications, guidance and ideas and illustrations are available, and resources that can offer support to students. In the 10 seconds I've got remaining, let me try to sum up real quickly. We've been privileged as one of the leading dispute resolution schools attached to a law school in the country to work with the Community Relations Service. But there's opportunity for other academic institutions to do the same thing. And it increases the capacity dramatically. I mean, these people represent both the past and the present of the Community Relations Service, but it's a small part of the Department of Justice. And we need lots of people in this work. And so, to the extent that the work we are doing can expand the capacity of the Department, the Community Relations Service, to take those 60 years of lessons, marry them with some of the dispute resolution techniques that we teach in law schools, and deliver them to communities that have the need, we will be able to expand the capacity dramatically, and it's so necessary in today's world. So thanks for the opportunity to be with you. And I have several copies of this guide that are hard copies. You're welcome to get them from me after the program. Daphne Felton Green yesterday on the early morning program spoke about essentially a companion guide that is the Divided Community Project's guide with ideas and illustrations. You're welcome to that as well. I have a few of those.
Thank you, Carl, and thank you, everyone. I just want to leave you with an invitation to partner with CRS. CRS would like to connect with you and partner with you, not duplicate the great work that you're doing, but work with you and see how we can advance the work of peace throughout the nation. There are these locations throughout the country. You can contact any region that is within your region or the CRS headquarters. And finally, very finally, CRS is hiring in 42 locations throughout the country. So if you know anyone or yourself may be interested in joining CRS, please reach out. Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking the panel.